don't deal with the problem of gun violence in our society. It's an ongoing problem. Of course, what happened to Sandy Hook has brought it back to the forefront. So we need to take another look and see what we can do to reduce gun violence in our society in ways that still allow people who want to go hunting in the woods to have access to what they need for their recreation. So we have Ken Gudger here with us. Ken was the Central California coordinator for the Brady Campaign for how many years, Ken?
5 or 6.
For 5 or 6 years. So he's going to give us a presentation, review some of the facts, and then after that we will take questions. Did you have a question?
Just a general question. Is this talk going to address how law-abiding citizens with guns, whether they're semi-automatics or single shots, actually prevent crimes in progress, whether they're...
We'll have a question and answer session, and if you have statistics or facts, and we would ask that you have sources. If you have statistics and facts and sources that you wish to bring forward after the discussion, we'd be glad to hear them.
That wasn't mentioned in the flyer, but it would be helpful.
But yeah, we're going to have an open discussion when we're done, and if you have things you want to bring forward, yes, at that time.
Thank you, Bruce. Debbie and I have been supporters of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence for a couple of decades. And we had an incident in our neighborhood, broader neighborhood, 5 or 6 years ago that got us involved in the Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence. We had an article in the paper that just got to me, it really got to me. It was a 3-year-old boy, a toddler, that went to his parents' bedside table, pulled out a revolver pistol, and accidentally shot and killed his 2-year-old sister. I'm a grandfather. I'm a father. And it shook me up. And so we called the Brady Campaign to see where the nearest chapter was, and we were in Central California near Yosemite. Come on up, ladies. Come on in.
Thank you.
Find a seat. There's a lot of them. And there was no chapter nearby, and come on in. Come on in. And there was no chapter nearby, so we called Sacramento, talked with the people there, and said we'd be willing to start a Brady chapter. And so we started the Central California Brady chapter. And this is a presentation that we put together to talk to groups. And what I'd like to do is start by just acknowledging the people in the Brady Campaign. We got to know a lot of them. This happens to be Nick and Amanda Wilcox. Their daughter, 18 years old, 18, got a job, her first job, Nevada City, California, as a commercial receptionist in a commercial establishment. And she'd only been there a few weeks, and she became the victim of a mass shooting at that establishment. And that must have been, Debbie, 15 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, some time ago. And Nick and Amanda got involved in trying to reduce gun violence. And today, they are the Brady Campaign's lobbyists in Sacramento. They work full-time in Sacramento with no salary. They're totally volunteer. They pay all their own expenses and have no salary. They are the nicest, sweetest people you'd ever want to meet. We hosted them at our house one evening for a weekend. They talked to a group, and just neat people. When I think of the Brady Campaign, I think of the hundreds of people who act in volunteer capacity. We were always volunteers. Let's see, Bruce, this is the arrow. So what I'd like to do is quickly go through just a lot of facts. Just a lot of maybe dry statistics. Come on in. And you'll see sources for all these statistics on the slides. Some of the slides might be a couple of years old because this was a presentation we used in California a couple of years old. Some of these statistics don't change that much from year to year, others do. I will try to stick with the facts. If I've got an opinion, I'll try to preface that with editorial comment or opinion. So let's start with international comparisons, a comparison of the United States to other countries. In Japan, 2010, this is the the statistics, or this is the source. In 2010 in Japan, 89 fatalities due to gun violence. UK, 137. Canada, 724. Italy, you can see that, 758. Germany, 880. United States, 31,430.
What's the difference in population of each of those? So
We're going to talk about that next.
Great.
This is somewhat misleading because California has 300 million people, Germany has 80 million people, Canada has 40 million people. So you do have to normalize this.
California has 30 million, not 300.
The United States
has 300 million.
United States has 300 million. So here's the same countries, the same numbers, but now we've divided those numbers by the population. So this represents the fatalities per 100,000 people. If you assume that Japan was the lowest, then this is a 3.6, meaning that UK had 3.6 times the fatalities per 100,000 than Japan did in 2010.
Gun fatalities.
These are all firearm fatalities.
How's that compare with the people over in UK now getting...
This is all firearm fatalities for 2010.
But also the violence from things like people getting hit with...
This is firearm fatalities only.
I know, but compare.
The rules are that the presentation will be made.
Okay.
Then there'll be questions.
Okay.
So if you could, if
Well, I was just trying to do it with this.
well, I understand,
view.
but it would be courteous to let the presentation be made and then bring forward what you'd like.
So on this slide, you can see that the United States is 10.2 firearm fatalities 2010 per 100,000 population. Come on in. Most of the industrialized countries are in the 1s and 2s. There's a few industrialized countries below 1. We stand alone in the industrialized world at 10.2 fatalities per 100,000. Let's take this number and break it down in detail. Let's figure out where all these fatalities come from. So the next slide is actually 2007. And just to show you these numbers don't change much year to year, this is 2010, 31,430. The next slide is 2007, 31,224 in that particular year. So, the 31,224 fatalities in 2010 break down in homicides, suicides, and then the 3 smaller categories of unintentional, accidental fatalities, legal intervention by peace officers or private citizens protecting themselves, and undetermined, where somebody didn't fill out the paperwork right when they went to the CDC, and we don't know what those fatalities were caused by. There's some asterisks here. Let's talk about the asterisks. So of the 12,600 homicides, there were additional 44,400 people who had an attempted homicide. They were shot, but they didn't expire. So there's actually somewhere around 56,000 people shot through homicide, 12,000 of who died. Look at the suicide rate. 17,000 suicides in 2007. Only about 20,000 people attempted suicide. So the firearm is very effective at suicides. And we were just talking about suicide issues, I guess, in Montana. I think this is the other side of the suicide. Accidental deaths, 18,000 people shot, but only 600 died. So it's the flip side of the suicide issue. All told then, 100,000 people, just a little shy of that, 97,000 people were shot in 2007, of which 31,000 died. year after year, homicides are about 40%, suicides about 60%. It varies a little bit year by year. Some rather random facts. About 34% of all the households in America have firearms in them. This number has been dropping since the 1970s. In the 1970s, this number was around 50%. It's been dropping. This is on the way down. About 50% of these 34%, in other words 17% nationwide, the guns are not locked. 17% the guns are locked. I think that's a very important issue. The difference between responsible gun users and, I don't want to call them irresponsible, but just people who are not as concerned about the lethality of these weapons as they need to be. I think, editorial comment now, I think the challenge we have in firearm violence is with those who own firearms who don't respect the firearms and don't lock them up and protect unintentional users from them. Like that example of the 3-year-old boy shooting his 2-year-old sister. Approximately 30,000 gun deaths a year, 200 legally justified. We saw that before. About 40% of the gun acquisitions occur through the secondary market. Let me take a minute with this, because this is important. In the United States today, there's about 60,000 federal firearm licensees, gun shops. These are law-abiding owners of gun shops, businessmen, businesswomen, who have a license from the federal government to sell weapons, and they require a background check, as we'll talk about in a minute. But the private sales, if I were to sell a gun to one of you, I don't have to have that background check. So the private sales go around the Brady background check law. And this has commonly been called the gun show loophole. It's really bigger than the gun show loophole because it's all private sales, not just private sales that occur at gun shows, but all private sales. Suicides and guns, we talked on that briefly. A firearm suicide is more likely to be fatal than other types of suicide. Firearms are used in about 5% of the suicides, but they're something like 90-95% successful. Where drugs and cutting are used in about 85% of the attempts, but they're only about 3% successful. So firearms are very effective at suicides. States with high household gun ownership have more suicides than states with low ownership. And we need to talk more about that, and I will in a minute. A gun in the home is about 11 times more likely to be used in a suicide than in a self-defense attempt. Children and guns. This is what, editorial comment, this is what hurts me as a grandfather. Most of us, I think, would be upset by this. In 2006, more preschoolers were killed by guns than peace officers in the line of duty in the United States. More children under the age of 6, preschool, killed by guns, 63, than peace officers killed in the line of duty. If we expand children out to all teenagers, then the fatalities that year by firearms would fill 127 classrooms with 25 children in each classroom. Public attitudes about guns are changing drastically after Sandy Hook, so I think this slide is a little dated. 94% of police chiefs nationwide support a Brady background check for all gun purchases. There's a big difference between police chiefs and county sheriffs. County sheriffs are elected, police chiefs by and large are not elected, so you see a big difference between those two groups. Most of the NRA members support some sort of criminal background check. I think this number has gone up, according to some statistics I've just seen recently. 70% of American voters mistakenly believe that a system for gun licensing and registration exists in the United States. It's just not true. There is no registration of guns in the United States. 96% of high school students would like to see mandatory background checks. So how did we get here? I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we had the Second Amendment ratified as part of the Bill of Rights. Before that, we had the Constitution. Before that, we had the Declaration of Independence. National Rifle Association was formed right after the Civil War by General Ambrose, who was perturbed that his recruits in the Civil War, quote, couldn't shoot straight. So he formed a marksmanship club. That's what it started out to be: care, respect, treatment of rifles, pistols. Come on in. And that was the National Firearm Association, National Rifle Association in 1981. In 1934, there were 2 federal acts passed. The first significant efforts at regulating guns during the Prohibition days, 18th Amendment. We had the gangster culture. That's when they outlawed automatic weapons. That's when they started the federal firearm licensee system that still exists today. Then in 1968, we had another major piece of legislation after the 3 assassinations, President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy. Actually, Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated President Kennedy, had bought his rifle. Did I misspeak?
Yeah, come on. No,
That's
there's no way in the world that he did it. There's no way
highly
there's too
Well,
many
let me just
people.
assume
You
for a
can't
minute that he
shoot
did,
that. You
okay?
can't shoot that.
Just
What
bear
about
with me.
us?
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated President Kennedy,
Nobody believes
bought, I believe it, bought his rifle on a catalog purchase, catalog sales. Mail order restrictions were placed in 1968. ATF was formed in 1972. In 1986, we had 2 more pieces of legislation outlawing some types of ammunition and also opening up some of the previous restrictions. 1994, the Brady Bill was passed. We'll review that in detail in just a minute. And also, the assault weapons ban was put in place in 1994. That expired in 2004. The Heller case by the Supreme Court is very important. It was just a few years ago now, 2008. Supreme Court rules that Americans have a right to weaponry, irrespective of the regulated militia clause in the Second Amendment. And then, of course, this year, President Obama proposed some sweeping changes to the Gun Control Act, which is the 1968 Act. We could talk about this all night, but let's move on. Let me talk about the Brady Bill. It's probably the most significant thing that's happened in the last several decades. 1981, outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, President Reagan and 3 others were wounded. Probably the most serious of all was James Brady, his press secretary. I will go through this quickly. James Hinckley was the attempted assassin. He had a criminal record. He had mental health instabilities. And 3 days before the assassination, attempted to board an American Airlines flight in, I think it was Tennessee, to fly up to Washington. He had 3 handguns on him. So when they looked back at this, they saw that there was a need for some sort of control of these sort of people that have mental health stability issues, criminal background issues, and have handguns on them. Sarah Brady, the wife, became very involved in gun control. 1991, President Reagan, before his Alzheimer's, penned an editorial supporting gun control. And finally, 12 years after the attempted assassination, President Clinton signed the Brady Act. This is kind of small, so let me just tell you, what does the Act do? Well, it establishes a NICS system, a national criminal information database that the FBI maintains. And it provides instant background checks from all federal firearm licensees, once again, gun shop owners, the 60,000 gun shop owners in the United States. If I were to go into a gun shop tomorrow and try to buy a gun, I'll be asked to fill out an ATF 4473 form. I don't know, Oregon might have their own form, but it has at least as much information as the 4473. It's a two-sided form with a ton of instructions. I fill that form out. That information goes into the FBI database, and within a matter of minutes, that information will come back to the gun shop owner, and I'll either be accepted or denied. Why would I be denied? Because of one of these 7 categories. A convicted felon with more than 1 year in prison, fugitive from justice, unlawful user of controlled substance, adjudicated as mentally defective, illegally in the United States, a restraining order by a spouse, a partner, or a child of a partner, or convicted of domestic violence, even if that's a misdemeanor. If I'm convicted of domestic violence, the FBI system should deny me. What's the impact? How has it worked? The FBI gave us a report after 15 years, and they found that after 15 years there were 100 million background checks. And of the 100 million background checks, 98.2 million passed, and 1.8 million people were denied. What's the main problem with the effectiveness of the act? It doesn't cover private sales. So I can sell a gun, no background check required. That's the Brady Campaign, that's the Brady bill that came out of the Reagan attempted assassination. Let's look at a comparison. A lot of gun issues are really state issues. There's a lot of talk about the federal government, and there should be a lot of talk about it. But most of the gun regulations, most of the gun issues are controlled by the state houses of the 50 states. There is a correlation between gun ownership, gun regulations, and gun fatalities.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is much more complicated than we think it is, and I'd like to get into that a little bit. Here's a comparison from a 2010 study based on 2007 data. Here are the 5 states with the highest gun death rates. So you have Louisiana at almost 20 deaths per 100,000 people in that particular year, Mississippi, Alaska, Alabama, Nevada. And here's the 5 states with the lowest gun death rates. Hawaii, 2.8 people per 100,000. And it goes down Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. There's been a lot of study on this. This just kind of gives you a hint of the study. But gun ownership rates on these states, 45% of the households, 54, 60, 57, 31. Gun ownership by household is those numbers. Gun ownership by household here, 9, 13, 12, 16, 18. Remember on one of the previous slides I said 34% of the houses in America have a gun in them. And of those 34%, excuse me, yes, of those 34%, about half of them, the guns are not locked, and half of them, they are locked. So 34% is the national average. Here's the actual numbers. What happened, Bruce?
Yeah, it happened. Somehow, what happened is Windows decided it was time to update.